When it comes to Columbus Day, as a kid growing up in New England, it had the significance of making the official start to fall. Much like Memorial Day is to kick off the summer and Labor Day is the official ending of summer, Columbus Day is for many a 3-day weekend or paid holiday, and it's the kickoff of the fall season. Although we enjoy the benefits of a 3-day weekend or the extra pay, many of us are unaware of why we consider setting aside a holiday to honor, or at the very least, acknowledge the man called Christopher Columbus. Here is a brief history on this historic figure. I am not going to attempt to get into any of the type of debate on what kind of person Christopher Columbus was. Instead, I am going to give a brief description of the history involved surrounding this man to this day. Christopher Columbus is Italian. He was born in Italy in 1491. As a lover of the ocean, Columbus first learned how to sail at age 14. He eventually became an entrepreneur and knew that anyone who could transport goods the fastest would become very wealthy. At the time, the Europeans would trade with goods with the Orient. The only way to transport these goods would be a land route. Christopher Columbus had a vision of sailing west to reach the Orient. Knowing this was going to be a very costly venture, he needed to find the backing financially that would allow him to make the journey. If he could prove that you could reach the Orient by sailing west, he would become famous, establishing trade routes that would make him very wealthy. This trip, as glorious as it would be if he was right, would be a total disaster if he became proven wrong. He decided to actually plan a route to Asia, heading westbound. The time period had maps that were inconsistent and somewhat unreliable when it came to charting courses in certain unknown areas of the world. Knowing this, many financial backers were understandably reluctant to give Columbus the financial backing he needed. In fact, it took 6 years to finally convince Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand to approve him financially. Spain would take the risk to back Columbus with the promise of expanding Spain's empire. On October 3, 1492, Christopher Columbus would depart southern Spain. He was in command of a total of 87 men. He would also command 3 sailing vessels, the Nina, the Pinta, and finally his flagship, the Santa Maria. On October 12, 1492, after 29 days at sea, Christopher Columbus and his ships would make landfall. Though he found land, he was nowhere near where he thought he'd be. He was hoping to find Asia, but that wouldn't be the case. In fact, he would be nearly 10,000 miles from the spot that he thought he would end up at. Eventually, the spot he and his ships made landfall at would later become the West Indies. He did suspect that the spot he was at was very close, or in fact, India itself. He would land on what are called today the Caribbean Islands. He would call the island he was on San Salvador. He would later discover additional islands that would eventually be called Cuba and Hispaniola. Christopher Columbus would eventually return to Spain in March of 1493. He returned to present exotic plants, gold, and actual natives to the area, to the king. It is said that the natives were taken hostages and presented before the King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella as such. The king and queen were delighted with the results that Columbus had brought before them. Columbus was touted a hero and treated as so. As a result, Spain would continue to finance Christopher Columbus and his crew for future expeditions. During a time period that would span from 1493 to 1504, Columbus would make 3 more transatlantic crossings, each time bringing back more exotic items from the islands. In 1504, Christopher Columbus would make his last trip to the Caribbean. When Columbus returned, he was age 53 and in poor health. Columbus would eventually pass away in Spain on May 20th, 1506 at the age of 55. Although he never actually found the sea route to the Orient, his trips were still considered hugely successful. Though credited with discovering the Americas, this would seem truer when it came to the European point of view. Columbus and his ventures would in fact double the size of the planet or livable areas and establish trade between the continents. In 1937, President Theodore Roosevelt would officially proclaim October 12th as Columbus Day. Eventually, in 1971, President Richard Nixon would declare Columbus Day as a national holiday. This holiday has been observed ever since. Despite controversy to the type of man Columbus was, or the tactics he may have used against the indigenous peoples of the areas he was credited for discovering, Americans to this day can enjoy the pay, benefits, parades, and long weekends that his name is attached to.